Be careful who you talk to on Facebook. Malicious people may ask you for private information to commit crimes. In fact, that's what we're going to find out in these 4 scary stories that can happen to you too. So get comfortable, turn off the lights, and make sure your doors are securely locked. And let's get started. A few years ago, my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and I were selling some of our old stuff. After we moved to another apartment, one of those objects was our old TV. We had put an ad on eBay and another on that Facebook marketplace thing, which was something new. At that time, we decided to wait and see what kind of offer we were going to receive. My wife was almost certain that she had found a fairly decent buyer who would come to the apartment himself to pick up the TV, which was quite convenient. But I got a message from someone who, although he couldn't pay the price we were asking, made us an offer we couldn't refuse. This was an older man who seemed to live alone with his dog and whose television had recently broken down and he could not afford to buy a new one. He said he could pay about 70% of the price we were asking and that he would pay us the rest with plumbing services if we ever needed them. I ended up having an emotional chat with that guy. It reminded me of an old uncle of mine, and I immediately liked it. He'd just been through a rough patch and it wasn't his fault. If anyone deserved a little kindness, it was definitely him. After a brief chat with my wife, we decided to bring the TV directly to her house for free. However, we knew this man wouldn't accept our quality right away, or almost no chance of that happening given how kind he was. After insisting, he agreed. However, she kindly asked us to wait 3 weeks before dropping her off at her house as she needed time to gather the money. But in itself, that wasn't a problem for us. We were happy to help him, wrote down his address and everything else, and promised to keep in touch in a few weeks. The days passed and my partner and I decided to bring the television to her house on a Saturday morning. Before leaving, we called the man to let him know we were coming, but he didn't answer. We've tried him 123 times, but he's still not picking up. It may seem selfish, but the TV was already packed and taking up space in our house. So even though it wasn't responding, we decided to go anyway and maybe leave the TV with one of its neighbors. On the one hand, it also suited us. I thought he was so kind that my wife and I wanted to give him the TV. We wouldn't have to go through all the potential inconvenience of refusing to take the money. Anyway, we're going to this man's address by keeping the TV in the car. I go out, climb through the entrance and knock on the door. No one answers. At that moment, I lay back and look out his bedroom window, to see if there's any lights on or anything. Then when I look, I see all those little black spots on the blinds and on the edge of the window. I wondered, but what is that? Thinking it might be bits of dirt or something. One of the small pieces moves quickly and suddenly. What do insects do? And that's when I realized all those spots were actually flies, very large flies that were clustered on the window. What the hell? But what is that? That was my first reaction. I didn't understand right away why they were grouped together and formed like spots. It's not like watching a fly alone. There were so many that my brain could not calculate what my eyes saw. Then I immediately understood what was wrong and a horrible feeling came over me. There were so many that I thought something must be dead in that apartment, and in that case someone had died in a horrible way. And in fact, he was the old man we were attached to throughout the saga of getting rid of our old TV. The whole thing was horrible. It was we who called the police and also the fire department, who broke down the door of his apartment. Once they opened the door, a strong smell began to spread through the streets. It was the most horrible thing I've ever experienced in my life. I know this guy wasn't exactly my best friend, but I feel like even though we only exchanged a few messages, we got to know him. He was a bon vivant, independent, And I'm pretty sure he was also a veteran. Those scavenger flies so big and full I didn't even recognize right away that they were flies as huge as they were. They had reproduced and fed on rotting flesh. The same guy I'd fallen in love with a few weeks before. It just scares me to imagine what death is like. If the idea of what happens to us when we die is quite intimidating, but it's how sudden and seemingly random death can be. With all those little sinister details, for example, I couldn't get the image of those flies in the window as if they were his ghost out of my head. I don't know what. Maybe we leave a little piece of ourselves behind when we die, but I have this image of flies, which was something very, very ugly. In 2016, the Xbox One S was released, which was basically an Xbox capable of playing in 4K. Not to be confused with the Xbox XYs launched last year. That was 2 years ago when the Facebook Marketplace was just starting. I bought the new edition of the console and wanted to get rid of the old one. I chose Facebook Marketplace because I didn't have an eBay account and it seemed like the easiest thing. In short, this was opening me up to one of the scariest experiences of my life. So I posted an ad for my Xbox One stick setting a reasonable price of about $100. Then I sat down and waited for the requests for information. As you can imagine, it didn't take long for the internet to pull out all the anonymous crazies who told me that $30 would be a more than reasonable price. Could he leave the console at his house, which in that case was in the neighboring state? No one was seriously interested. From what I understand, it was a 4-year-old console. I'd have been lucky to sell it at this point. So when the mother of a child told me that he was very sick and that maybe I could give him a discount, I thought, sure. Why not? The first message from the boy's mother was very long and told a very sad story about her 10-year-old son having a rare disease with little chance of surviving. I forgot the name of the disease, but I googled it and it turned out to be real with severe symptoms. I probably shouldn't have called it a sad story, but that's exactly what I thought at first. In exchanging messages with the lady, I noticed that for me it was only trivial. He could make his family much happier. Went from a strange indifference to a serious commitment that for that child would be a Christmas he would never forget. After a few days of talking to this lady, I decided to give her this gift for free. He didn't need money and could enjoy the good karma he earned. It was a little embarrassing to admit how deep I had sunk into all this. I bought high-quality bubble wrap and cardboard boxes to ship electrical appliances. I wanted to be Santa Claus for the kids. That year, as crazy as it sounds, my charitable plan made me feel good about myself. So when it started to fall apart, I didn't want to believe it. When it came time to get that lady's mailing address, there were some inconsistencies that caught my attention, but didn't immediately arouse my suspicions. And for example, at first he gave me one address, then he gave me another. When asking her for confirmation, confront her on the subject. But he said he lived in a complex where packages were stolen. Evidently neither of them wanted to risk the Xbox being stolen, so they gave me the address of one of their friends who could receive it safely. A totally credible excuse, don't you? She was a single mother living in a tough neighborhood and I was giving her a hand. Maybe I should have noticed the warning signs, but I felt too self-sufficient to notice. I stumbled because the lady said her children would start medical treatment for their illness. She mentioned a specific date for the start of treatment, and it turned out to be the same day I was about to send the package. I have the console packed with controls, cables, and games appropriate for the child's age. That's what I thought. I imagined it was a stressful time for her to see her son being examined by various health professionals. It must probably be a burden to her. Could sending a letter to the console that day cheer her up? I tried to keep the surprise, but I've never been very good at that, and I also wanted to enjoy a little of my own generosity. So I sent the single mother a message on Facebook. Hello, today I'm sending the package. I just wanted to make sure I have the correct address. She replies to me, oh my God, you just made my day, you're a sweetheart. I answer, No problem. I hope it reaches you without problems. The timing is perfect. Because Franklin starts his therapy next month, the following month I review the conversation and find the message where she mentions the 25th. We exchange messages that day too. I'm obviously quite confused and I don't have any major suspicions yet. So I say, oh, I thought she was starting her therapy today. She explains to me, it's not next month, like she didn't tell me about 25 at all. It was only when I confronted her on that subject that she told me, yeah, we had to move some dates. It's my fault for not telling you, for at that moment my spider senses start to tingle. So I decide to ask him if there's anything he's not telling me. She obviously says no, but I decide it would be better to talk about it over the phone, so I insist on calling her. She responds like, I know it's real, and she seemed busy and impatient, so I thought she just gave her a hard time. Everything would have gone well if she hadn't made a fatal mistake. After apologizing for wasting his time and before hanging up, she mentions that Freddy will be happy with the Xbox. Freddy a week calling Franklin his son, and now it turns out to be Freddy. I'm not even sure I could blame the self-corrector. It was just a damn phone call. I called back and confronted her with her bluff. I didn't know for sure, but I acted like I did. I told her I knew she was a con artist and would report her to the police. At first there was some resistance and denial, but I could feel her integrity crumbling with each accusation, and she finally gave in when she did. It was so cruel that it almost left me speechless for 1 minute. It was a complete Jekyll and Hyde transformation of that kind single mother, pretending to be the real soulless con artist she was. Although I unmasked her, she called me gullible for believing her in the first place. He also told me sad, pathetic and sensitive for wanting to give my things to a child who might not live and take advantage of that. In that speech he told me that people like me would always be worthless, pathetic idiots. I was just trying to stay calm. I warned her that I would report her on Facebook and send screenshots of her profile and photos to the police before sharing her profile on Facebook groups, where I was a member, to warn about possible scams. But of course it wasn't the real profile, of course. There were 20 others. At least that's what she said. My profile was real and everything I told him about me was true. The psycho knew what I looked like, she knew where I lived, and she knew all kinds of things about me, and I knew absolutely nothing about her, except that she was willing to lower herself even further to get what she wanted. And besides, he wouldn't hesitate to make terribly graphic threats of violence against me and my family. And as silly as it sounds, that was at the time when my sister and cousin appeared on my profile as members of my immediate family. And that was what shocked me the most, having been foolish enough to put information about my closest family ties on a silver platter. The scammer told me that she was a fool if she believed the police could do anything against her, and that if she received news from the police she would send her boyfriend after my family. I didn't know if the threat was real, but having access to his profile, it made me feel anxious and very guilty. If they ended up getting hurt by something I did or didn't do, I don't think I would have been able to live with myself. Obviously, that all ended when I blocked the scammer and contacted my cousins and sister to tell them to make her profile private. I was honest with them. I told them that I had been the victim of a scam and that I was afraid that my personal information was compromised. The scammer had impersonated someone using their photos, profile and name. The thought of her using one of our photos for a scam profile gave me chills. This case is by far the worst experience I've had online. And not just now, I'm very careful. When it comes to interacting with strangers on the internet, I recommend you do the same. A while ago, I saw an ad on the Facebook Marketplace for a woman who was giving away free gerbils. Apparently her male and female had had a large litter. Since there were too many for her, she was looking for someone to give them to. You should know that in this animal the mother eats the babies if she thinks she won't be able to take care of them. As I knew it well, I contacted the lady to save the babies. The woman turned out to be a widow who had initially bought the gerbils to keep her company. I told myself it was quite unusual that she wouldn't have bought a cat or a dog if she was lonely. But hey, everyone to their own. No, I'm not the type to judge. Also, she sounded very nice when I spoke to her on the phone to make an appointment. I prepared a straw cage to take the gerbils home, and my dad and I went to his house. When we arrived at his door, we had a bad feeling. At first he didn't answer right away when we knocked. Then, when he finally opened the door, we discovered an old woman in a sorry state. One of his eyes was swollen and full of blood, and he had some kind of very disgusting yellow substance that was pooling in the corner of his eye. My dad and I were kind and acted normal so as not to bother or offend her. Surely she was very sick and knew it. But when she invited us in, we understood how she had become sick. His little house stank. It was like the worst smell I had ever smelled in my life. Gerbils were everywhere, but really everywhere. And like her owner, she wasn't healthy either. Only from the gerbils that roamed the kitchen could I see that many of them no longer had fur in some parts. Some had painful bumps on their legs or backs. Then, when he invited us into his living room for a cup of tea, we realized that it was even worse inside. My dad and I looked at each other and immediately understood without saying anything. We had to make up an excuse not to stay long. I felt like I was getting sick. It was disgusting. There was excrement everywhere, in every corner and under the plinths. It was no surprise that this lady had fallen ill. Then, behind a curtain, I saw a real little rodent skeleton. I improvised immediately to get my dad and me out of there. I asked him to remind me what we had to buy at the store. Then he understood immediately and followed my games. He said, "Oh sure, we can take the gerbils home without that object." "Oh sorry, we're not going to be able to take the gerbils with us now. We're going to have to come back in a few days." We left quickly, and I remember we were both sitting in the car in shock at what we had just seen. Obviously, she didn't have anyone to come see her, and anyone who thought it was normal to keep a house like that really must be losing their minds. I don't usually lie or do what I did. I felt bad for doing that, so I called the Humane Society so that at least the animals would be saved. They told me on the phone that they were going to investigate and that they would keep me informed of what they were going to do. And they finally contacted us again to thank us for letting them know. Not only the lady with the gerbil was now in contact with a local charity that would help her, but his house was considerably cleaner and safer. After removing nearly 100 gerbils from their home, they said the situation was so catastrophic that the only thing preventing the infestation from spreading were neighborhood cats. I saw a lot of animals prowling in front of his house. I thought it was only because she was the friend of the neighborhood animals and fed them. She thought she was doing a good deed, but in the end she was doing more damage than anything else. The most frightening thing is that when he stood in front of his house, he never opened himself, imagining the horror that awaited us inside. And all this reminds me that we really don't know what goes on behind closed doors. Even those we hold dear often hide unknown truths behind normality, leaving us unaware of what our friends and neighbors truly do. My dad was a guitarist. It was the only skill he had, but I guess that was enough for him because music was his whole life. He earned his living playing in several groups in Kalamazoo. I've never seen anybody play bluegrass like my dad. Excuse my language, but my dad grew up in Kentucky and brought the whole South with him. When my mom and he moved here, I was in metal and all that. As a kid, I was going to Detroit to see Cannibal Corpse, but my dad taught me to love bluegrass. As you can imagine, being a musician all his life meant that my dad will face financial difficulties. And at some point we almost lost the house. We saved every last penny. My mom had 2 jobs and my dad had 1 extra bartender, but it wasn't enough. My dad's favorite guitar was an old Martin that looked as old as the hills, as steaks and whiskey. Acoustic guitars get better over the years, so to speak. A kind of character or soul settles into the body, something that gives the sound a richness. It's hard to describe, but my dad's Martin had plenty of it. Never heard a guitar sound as sweet as that old Martin he adored. But the thing is, nothing else fetched as good a price as that guitar. And even though it broke his heart, to do so was to sell the guitar or endanger his family. My dad, as always, sold the Martin at casino for $5,000. Then everything got better. We kept the house, Dad gave concerts again, and Mom got a promotion. It took us 2 years to get up, but we made it. Around that time, Dad started getting headaches that we attributed to stress. He worked very hard to put food on the table. So it was no surprise that he was feeling the effects. Then the headaches got so bad that he finally agreed to see a doctor just when we least needed him, and everything was getting better for the family. Boom! He was diagnosed with a brain tumor, an aggressive tumor. In addition, the doctor gave him 2 months to sort out his affairs after his death. I missed him so much so that I started pestering my mom to find out who she had sold her old Martin to. I felt that getting the guitar back would give my dad back a little, but much to my disappointment, my mom had no idea who she had sold it to. Years had passed, and it wasn't like my dad would keep many records. It was horrible, but in the end I resigned myself to never seeing it again. I guess that was part of my grieving process. Years later, I live in Detroit and try to start my own music career. Some friends and I came out of a sleazy bar. And we came across a woman who claimed to be a psychic. When I heard it, I thought a waitress at the bar had found it, an original way to get you a couple of drinks by tickling the palm of your hand and telling you that you are going to become rich. But that lady wasn't a con man. She seemed to sincerely believe that she could read us, as she said. He told my friend that he would hurt many, and that afterwards he could not forgive himself. We took it as a joke. That boy was a coward, incapable of being violent or anything like that. Then, to keep the joke going, I asked him to read to me. Instead, she looks me up and down as if analyzing my hair for a moment and says, "What you are looking for is in your pocket." The only things I had with me were my keys, my phone, and a pack of cigarettes. That's it, and the only thing I was looking for regarding that was a lighter, and I definitely didn't have one in my pocket the next morning. He had a hangover so bad it could have killed a little boy. I lay in my bed for 1 hour, scrolling through social media on my phone and looking at the photos from the night before, trying not to throw up, while I kept moving. I saw the Facebook Marketplace tab and thought, I'll check. Looking at the instruments for sale, I found something that almost makes me jump out of bed in less than 1 minute. A guy was selling a guitar. It was exactly the same make and model as my dad's old favorite lying down. I look at the photos and notice the hits and details that say "I'm your dad's guitar." Then I see the case and I swear my head started spinning anyway. The guy was selling it for a lot more than he could afford, but it didn't take me long to convince him to make some kind of payment plan with me, given that it had huge sentimental value in getting it back. Dad's ghost seemed to float in the room. My mom cried the first time I played her an old tune on her Martin, but what's so scary about that? I probably hear you ask, the psychic story was just coincidence. Besides, I wasn't right because your friend wasn't a serial killer, was he? Well, yes and no, but that makes that crazy old woman's prediction seem so prophetic. As soon as I get my guitar back, my drunken partner has an accident at work. Nothing serious, but I need a prescription for painkillers so I can get back to work before it runs out. Compensation was never the same after the accident. Over the next 6-7 months he started losing weight, taking random days off, disappearing on weekends. Money started disappearing from his and his wife's bank account. Then jewelry and electronics started disappearing as well. We should have known what was going on, but I never imagined that guy had that personality, and it had to be his wife who figured it out for us to realize he was addicted to crazy waters. In the following years, my friend fulfilled the madwoman's prophecy, hurting and alienating almost everyone important in his life. I let him stay on my couch for a few days after his wife finally kicked him out for emptying her savings account. After he stole from me too, I had to kick him out like the others. Last I heard of him, he was living with his new girlfriend, Yankee, in Chicago. A few months later, his ex-wife told me there was an arrest warrant out for him. The cop claimed that his girlfriend overdosed and left her in front of the hospital. She was dead right there on the bench. When that crazy woman told me what I was looking for was in my pocket. She couldn't have known about my dad's Martin guitar, or foreseen that she would look for it on Facebook. He was wrong about my pockets that night. Although he was somewhat right about my friend, he was right. I think she was wrong. I don't see him hurting anyone on purpose. He was just a very nice guy. My obsession with physical violence prevented me from noticing that he fulfilled his predictions exactly. I didn't believe in the paranormal. I don't believe in mediums or ghosts. I'm not even religious. But that night we drank a crazy old woman. He told us the future. Amazingly, his strange prophecies unfolded exactly as foretold.